My parents gave away the home I grew up in, on my birthday. Everything I loved, every corner filled with childhood memories, every wall I had helped paint, every tree I had planted, was gone in an instant. I stood there, silently, watching them hand the keys to my sister as if I had no say, no right, no history there. Their smiles were wide, their voices full of pride, completely unaware that I had quietly owned the land it was built on. And just like that, the world I knew flipped, but I didn't panic. I only smiled, a calm, knowing smile, because soon, they would realize they had just handed me my own power. The room buzzed with laughter, the clinking of glasses, the small talk of relatives who thought this was just another celebration. But inside, every heartbeat counted the moments I had waited for this, waiting for them to underestimate me, to believe I was powerless. Today, their confidence would become the very thing that would unravel everything they thought they controlled. And while they celebrated my loss, I quietly planned my triumph. I had just arrived at the party, expecting a few quiet congratulations, maybe a cake, maybe laughter with friends. Instead, I was met with a sight that tightened my chest like a fist. My parents stood near the center of the living room, handshakes exchanged, hugs given, all smiles directed at my sister, who now held the keys to the home I had called mine in every memory, every whispered secret, every birthday wish I had ever made. "What a surprise," my father said, his tone carefully casual, as if giving away a house on someone's birthday was ordinary. "We thought it was time for your sister to have her own place. She deserves it." I looked at him, not speaking, letting the words sink into the hollow space they had carved in my chest. Deserves it? Did she deserve the walls I had traced with my fingers, the floors that knew my every fall, my every triumph? My parents' faces were calm, smug even, and their eyes never wandered toward mine. They hadn't expected resistance. They hadn't expected that I might see through the polite excuses, the rehearsed smiles, the casual gestures meant to make this feel like generosity. I didn't know," I finally breathed out, my voice low, steady, hiding the heat that was climbing in my chest. My mother stepped closer, her hand brushing against my arm, an almost apologetic gesture. "It's just, we thought it would be better this way. She's grown, she's moving on, and it's a special occasion." Special occasion. My birthday. My memories. Everything I had poured into that house, everything I had cherished since I was a child, stripped from me in polite words and carefully chosen smiles. I felt a strange calm wash over me, even as my heart thundered. The stakes were immediate: humiliation in front of everyone I knew, the crushing sense of betrayal from the people who were supposed to love me first, the loss of a home that no one else could ever truly understand. The guests clapped, raising their glasses, unaware of the tension coiling in the room like a silent serpent. My sister laughed, her voice bright, unknowing of the storm quietly brewing behind my eyes. She had no clue that the land beneath her feet belonged to me, that the very foundation of the walls she now claimed was mine. I let the truth linger in my mind, savoring the anticipation of the moment when they would finally realize their miscalculation. "You're making it sound worse than it is," my father added, attempting a smile. "It's just a gift. A family matter. Don't make a scene." A scene? Oh, I could make a scene. But not yet. Not when the power was mine to wield quietly, invisibly, while they celebrated as if I were powerless. I let them have their small victory, all the while counting every subtle detail, every flaw, every overconfidence that would work in my favor. I could see the corners of my mother's lips twitch with a faint anxiety, though she masked it well. My father's hand tightened around the champagne glass ever so slightly, the only hint of disturbance in a room that thought it was perfectly controlled. I didn't move, I didn't speak, but every fiber in my body was alert, aware, ready. They didn't know that this wasn't the end, it was the beginning. The air was thick with polite chatter, but beneath it, a quiet storm had settled. Every compliment, every laugh, every toast served only to remind me of the loss they thought I would silently accept. And yet, even as their eyes glimmered with false pride, I felt the first stirrings of anticipation, a deep, calm certainty that the moment they underestimated me would be their undoing. I walked past the crowd slowly, letting my presence be seen but not overbearing. People turned to smile, unaware of the tension that laced my every step. The rooms echoed with celebration, yet in my mind, I traced the property lines of my inheritance, the documents buried carefully in drawers they thought were hidden, the proof of ownership that would turn every confident gesture in this room into doubt and embarrassment. For the first time that evening, I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The stakes were clear: humiliation, betrayal, loss. And yet, the power lay quietly in my hands, unseen but unshakable. My parents thought they had won. My sister thought she had received a gift. But they hadn't realized that the very ground beneath their celebration belonged to me. And when the time came, every laugh, every toast, every casual gesture would echo differently, resounding with a truth they would not ignore. Everyone's eyes were on the new house keys resting in my sister's hand, glinting in the chandelier's light, and yet nobody noticed mine, the quiet truth hidden deep in my purse. My parents were smiling like kings and queens at court, reveling in the attention, in the applause of relatives who didn't know half the story. Their voices were calm, rehearsed, dripping with what they thought was generosity. But I didn't clap. I didn't laugh. I didn't look impressed. A cousin leaned in, whispering congratulations to my sister. "Wow, this is so amazing of them," she said, oblivious to the storm simmering behind my eyes. I nodded politely, my expression unreadable, letting them bask in the glow of their perceived triumph. Inside, my chest burned with frustration. Every word, every cheer, every shallow laugh reminded me that the people I trusted to love and protect me first had chosen to humiliate me instead. I could feel my parents' eyes occasionally flick toward me, a faint irritation flashing in their glances as if they expected compliance. That's when I noticed the subtle smirks, the faint shifts in posture of those around us, siblings, neighbors, distant relatives, all waiting, curious, unaware that I was quietly calculating every move, every word, every possible advantage. They thought I was stunned. They thought I was powerless. They couldn't have been more wrong. As the champagne flowed and the room's warmth buzzed with polite laughter, flashes of memory surged like lightning. I remembered the time my older cousin was praised for achievements I had quietly surpassed. I remembered birthdays when my parents had smiled only at her requests, the quiet favoritism masked as encouragement. I remembered the small betrayals, the whispered dismissals of my opinions, the subtle underestimation of my capability. And now, at my own birthday, they repeated the pattern, flaunting their power as if it were unquestionable. My sister's laughter rang across the room, bright and unguarded. She had no idea that the land beneath the house she was now claiming, the walls she would walk on, were mine. My silence became a mask, a weapon I wore with precision. Each nod, each polite smile, each casual movement was a calculation, a test of how confident they truly were in their victory. Then, a small slip, a cousin asking a pointed question about the legal paperwork for the house, made my pulse quicken. My father stammered slightly, an almost imperceptible hesitation. It was a tiny crack, barely noticeable, but enough to make my mind race. I imagined every possible scenario, how I could turn this public celebration into a stage for revelation, how their pride would become their undoing. Another memory came unbidden, the first house my family owned, the arguments over who deserved what, the way decisions were always made in whispered alliances, in secret rooms away from my gaze. I had been a bystander too long. Now, I was in control of the unseen strings, and the strings were taut. My mother's voice broke through my thoughts, sweet and sing-song, as if she were trying to soothe the room's tension. "Isn't this just perfect?" she said, gesturing at my sister. "It's all come together beautifully. Don't you agree?" I agreed. I agreed that everything was indeed perfect, but not for them. My smile was slight, almost imperceptible, but inside, a storm was gathering. The parents' celebration of what they thought was their victory only fueled my resolve. I let the silence stretch, letting them savor their triumph, all the while storing every glance, every gesture, every hint of overconfidence. The room shifted subtly as my sister moved to thank relatives. I caught the glances of aunts and uncles, their eyebrows raising slightly as they looked between us. Wait, what? I imagined their thoughts, their silent questioning, as the tension thickened. Small details that went unnoticed by the rest, the faint tremor in my father's hand, the almost imperceptible sigh from my mother, were signals, breadcrumbs leading to the crescendo I was preparing. The birthday cake arrived, candles flickering like tiny watchful eyes. Everyone leaned in to sing, unaware that the words of celebration carried a bitter irony. I hummed along quietly, a phantom in my own life, smiling politely at the song, letting every note echo with attention only I could feel. My parents' attention was on their daughter, on the applause, on the perfection of their orchestrated generosity. And I, the quiet observer, became the storm beneath it all. A flashback sharpened the tension, my 10th birthday, when a small prank by my sibling caused a minor disaster, and my parents laughed at my reaction while comforting her. That humiliation, buried for years, resurfaced now, mingling with the raw injustice of today. I felt the heat of embarrassment, the sting of betrayal, but also a cold, simmering anger that refused to break, refusing to be obvious. I took a slow breath, letting it anchor me. Every gesture became deliberate, every step measured. While they flaunted their triumph, I calculated mine. Every toast, every laugh, every whispered congratulations was a chance to study them, to learn their blind spots, to wait for the precise moment when patience would become victory. The chatter continued around me, oblivious to the storm quietly building. A friend commented on the house, praising my parents' generosity, completely unaware of the truth. I smiled, a thin, knowing smile, letting them believe what they wanted to believe. My silence became a cloak, a tool of suspense, a subtle wait, moment waiting to unravel in the right time. The room's energy thickened as gifts were exchanged, as laughter echoed, as the celebration pressed on. My parents leaned back, proud, satisfied, their triumph visible. And yet, within the calm, I felt the first threads of anticipation stretching taut. Soon, very soon, the illusion of victory they so proudly displayed would collapse, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with the quiet precision of truth finally revealed. I walked slowly among the guests, greeting them politely, letting my sister bask in her perceived triumph. Inside, my mind traced the property lines, the buried documents, the legal ownership that no one yet suspected. Every handshake, every compliment, every smile from the relatives fed the tension, layered it, made it denser. And as the evening wore on, each laugh, each toast, each casual gesture became part of the narrative I was writing in my head, a story they had no idea they were starring in. I was powerless to them only in appearance. In reality, the power was quietly, invisibly mine. Every glance I returned, every nod I offered, carried the weight of a reckoning they would not anticipate. By the time the candles were extinguished and the cheers faded, the room was still alive with celebration. And I was calm, poised, invisible in plain sight, knowing that the first public escalation had been absorbed, studied, and recorded. They had shown their confidence. They had flaunted their perceived victory. And all I had done was watch, breathe, and wait. Because the next move would come not from them, but from the one they had underestimated all along. I stepped away from the laughter, the clinking glasses, the casual chatter of a room that had no idea it was playing host to a storm. Alone, I leaned against the cool marble of the hallway, letting the noise fade into the background. In my mind, the house, the home my parents had so carelessly handed over, was no longer just a childhood memory. It was a battleground, a chessboard I had been waiting years to play on. The legal documents, buried in the bottom drawer of my father's old desk, surfaced in my memory. I had quietly ensured everything was in order years ago, anticipating that one day, someone might try to claim what wasn't theirs. And now, standing in the hallway, the truth pressed against me like a pulse I could feel in my chest. They had no idea. They believed the house, the walls, the memories, the land itself were theirs to give away. Yet, in reality, it belonged to me. I let a slow smile creep across my lips. Quiet, calculated, patient. Their confidence, their pride, their ignorance, they were all tools now. The stakes had never been higher, and the timing had never been more perfect. Every step I would take from here had to be deliberate, precise, and unseen. I was both predator and phantom, waiting for the right moment to strike. Memories flickered, my father's dismissive tone when I had mentioned the paperwork years ago, my mother's insistence that I was too young to handle responsibility. All the small injustices, all the subtle belittlements, now folded neatly into the foundation of a plan. They had underestimated me for years. Every condescending glance, every whispered favoritism, every small dismissal had taught me patience, observation, and strategy. My sister, oblivious to the storm I carried silently, came into view. She leaned against the doorway, laughing at some joke a cousin had whispered. Her happiness, innocent and unknowing, sparked a curious mix of protectiveness and calculated calculation in me. She had no idea that the very land beneath her feet was already mine. And she would soon learn that triumph built on ignorance is fragile. I reached for my phone, scrolling through messages from friends who knew pieces of the story, unaware of the depth of my plan. One text caught my attention, an old friend from college, someone who had once helped me research property laws. I paused, imagining the steps we had discussed quietly, the ways ownership could be revealed not with anger, but with precision and subtlety. This wasn't about revenge in the reckless sense, it was about correction, about reclaiming what was rightfully mine while teaching a lesson in humility. The hallway felt smaller, tighter, as if it recognized the tension in my chest. I traced the memory of past confrontations, the subtle power plays my parents had orchestrated. There had always been a hierarchy in the family, subtle and invisible, yet oppressive. But now, the invisible thread had shifted. They thought they held the upper hand, but they didn't realize that the foundation they had built their confidence upon was mine all along. I remembered the first time I had found the original land title. The leather-bound folder, hidden in a dusty corner of the study, had seemed almost prophetic. My father had never thought to check, my mother had never asked. And now, all those overlooked details were poised to overturn years of carefully maintained authority. I let my mind wander to strategy. Timing, placement, revelation. The first step had to be quiet. Observation, patience, testing reactions. Subtle nudges here and there, hints of ownership without revealing the full truth. Let them believe they were in control, even as I mapped every weakness, every hesitation, every unspoken assumption. Then came the flashbacks, fleeting but sharp. My 12th birthday, when I had argued for a small allowance to fix the fence we had built together, only to be dismissed. My 16th birthday, when a minor argument over chores had ended in laughter at my expense. My 20th birthday, a forgotten celebration because they were busy congratulating my sister for some minor achievement. Every slight, every dismissal, every undervalued effort had taught me vigilance and patience. And now, decades later, that patience was about to pay off. I paused, letting the quiet determination settle in. No one had noticed the subtle cues in my behavior tonight, the way I had observed, calculated, and planned while smiling politely. My parents were confident, the relatives unsuspecting, my sister oblivious. Perfect. I rehearsed conversations in my mind. Every word had weight, every gesture had meaning. I imagined the moment when I could reveal my claim not as a threat, not as anger, but as undeniable truth. The wait, what, moments that would leave them speechless, the ripple through the room as every assumption they had held unraveled before their eyes. Even the secondary characters, friends who had come to celebrate, cousins who might unknowingly complicate the moment, became variables in my calculations. I considered how they might react, who might ask questions too soon, who could tip the balance. Each person in the room was a piece on the board, moving quietly as I mapped the sequence of revelation. I leaned back against the wall, letting a slow, calm breath out. Frustration, embarrassment, simmering anger, they were all fuel now, refining the edge of my resolve. I had the advantage of time, observation, and knowledge. They had the illusion of control. The more they flaunted their victory, the more certain I became that the payoff would be absolute. A soft laugh from my sister pulled me briefly from thought. Her happiness was innocent, radiant, unaware of the tension coiling silently like a spring. I let the smile linger on my lips, subtle, almost unreadable. Beneath it, every detail, every hidden advantage, every small piece of patience and cunning had positioned me to strike with precision. The night stretched on, and I moved among guests, polite, quiet, unnoticed. Every toast, every compliment, every casual remark from my parents became part of the mental map I was drawing, tracking reactions, noting flaws, identifying cracks in their confidence. The public celebration, which they had intended to cement triumph, only fed the anticipation simmering inside me. As I sipped water from a glass, letting the noise wash over me, the thought crystallized fully: this wasn't about anger. This wasn't about shouting or confrontation. It was about quiet strategy, about demonstrating power without chaos, about letting them believe they were in control until the moment when undeniable truth would shift everything. The legal ownership of the land, long forgotten or dismissed by my parents, now glowed in my mind like a beacon. The memory of the folder in the study, the faint seal on the paperwork, the notarized proof, it was all ready. I only had to wait, calculate, and watch. Every glance, every smile, every gesture I exchanged tonight built toward the crescendo, the reveal that would upend decades of assumed authority. And as the candles flickered in the distance, I let a slow, confident smile settle across my face. They thought they had won. They thought the celebration belonged to my sister. But in truth, the power had quietly shifted. And when the moment came, it would be as precise and unstoppable as the tide, leaving no doubt who truly owned the ground beneath their feet. I watched them move through the rooms, unpacking boxes with laughter and chatter that seemed almost too loud, as if they were trying to fill the emptiness with proof of victory. My sister traced her fingers along the counter, humming softly, arranging furniture as though she were claiming something she didn't yet fully understand. My parents' smiles were wide, their hands busy, their voices confident, their pride evident in every gesture. I approached casually, pausing by the doorway, letting my gaze drift over the new furniture and the walls I had once measured with my own hands. "Interesting choice," I said lightly, my voice soft but deliberate, nodding toward a chair that had been placed awkwardly in the corner. My sister froze for just a moment, a faint frown crossing her face, before she laughed and waved it off. The pause was tiny, almost imperceptible, but it told me more than words ever could. As they moved through the house, I began dropping subtle hints, questions phrased as curiosity, casual remarks that seemed harmless but carried weight. "Did you double-check the property boundaries?" You know, with renovations, it's easy to overstep. I let the suggestion hang, my tone neutral, letting the seed of uncertainty settle. My parents blinked, just slightly, exchanging a glance I was careful not to meet directly. It was enough. I could see the tiniest flicker of doubt creep across their expressions, just enough to make me smile inwardly. A neighbor, who had stopped by unannounced, lingered in the doorway, pretending to admire the renovation. Their eyes darted subtly between us, curiosity piqued. I caught the faint furrow of their brow, the slight narrowing of their eyes. The pause, the moment of hesitation, was a tiny cliffhanger, the perfect reaction. I said nothing more, letting the air thicken with tension. I wandered through the rooms, speaking softly about things only someone who had known the house intimately would notice. "Funny, I don't remember that support beam being there," I said, almost casually, as if pondering aloud. My sister stopped mid-sentence, eyes flicking toward me, a subtle unease shadowing her smile. My parents' confident posture shifted imperceptibly, a minor crack in the armor of their certainty. Each remark was a thread, each glance a careful measurement of how the ground beneath their feet might tremble. I recalled the days when I had been dismissed, when my observations, my concerns, my subtle warnings were ignored or laughed off. Tonight, those same observations became my quiet arsenal. Every detail I mentioned was calculated to unsettle without revealing the full truth. The air in the house felt heavier as they unpacked a set of framed photos, placing them meticulously along a shelf. I leaned closer, noticing one in particular, a photograph of the old backyard, my footprints faintly visible in the soil. "It's strange how much has changed," I murmured, almost to myself. My sister glanced up, unease flickering in her eyes. My parents exchanged a silent look. No one knew yet why my words carried weight, but tension had begun to ripple through the room, subtle but undeniable. A cousin wandered in, curious about the noise, and I greeted them warmly. "You've got a good eye for detail," I said, nodding toward the placement of a rug that was slightly crooked. The cousins' eyes widened slightly, and a shadow of suspicion crossed their face. They asked nothing, but the pause, the unspoken question, was enough to heighten the suspense. The smallest reaction became a tool in my strategy, proof that the undercurrents of tension were spreading beyond the immediate family. I moved to the kitchen, noting the careful arrangement of utensils and appliances. "Interesting arrangement," I said, lightly tapping a corner cabinet. "It's almost as if someone didn't check the blueprint." My parents' smiles faltered slightly, my sister's laughter caught in her throat. The subtle suggestion of oversight, of potential error, weighed in the air like a silent accusation. Nobody could pinpoint why it felt uncomfortable, they just knew that something had shifted. I let moments linger, speaking in observations that seemed casual but were anything but. "Funny how things settle differently than you expect," I said, touching the edge of a countertop. My sister's fingers twitched as she adjusted the placement of a vase, self-conscious under my attention. My father's hand clenched slightly around a tool he was holding. My mother's smile became tighter, a hint of unease creeping in. Throughout, I let the audience in on my secret. I knew something they didn't. I owned the land, the foundation, the ground beneath the house they believed they controlled. And every word, every glance, every carefully placed observation slowly pulled at the threads of their certainty. I wandered to the living room again, letting my eyes trace the shadows, the lines of furniture, the subtle imperfections that only someone intimately familiar with the house would notice. "It's amazing how easily perspectives change," I murmured, almost to myself. My sister looked up, brow furrowing. My parents exchanged glances. Suspicion hung in the air, a palpable tension that wasn't quite understood but impossible to ignore. Another relative, standing near the doorway, tilted their head, observing silently. Their eyes narrowed slightly as if they had caught a faint signal that something was off. My subtle provocations had started to ripple outward. Every glance, every casual remark, every observation planted seeds of doubt, each one invisible but potent. I let a pause stretch, letting the quiet tension grow. My parents and sister moved around me, continuing their tasks, unaware of how carefully I had studied every reaction, every flinch, every hesitation. The celebration continued, but beneath it, a slow, deliberate undercurrent had begun, an invisible web of doubt and anticipation that I had spun without a single accusation or confrontation. The air shifted slightly as I approached a window overlooking the backyard, my eyes tracing the perimeter, the corners, the land that no one yet realized I truly owned. "Interesting how things settle over time," I said softly, almost to myself, letting the words float into the room. My parents' attention flicked, their posture subtly tense. My sister paused in her arrangement of flowers. Even a neighbor passing by the window lingered, sensing the subtle shift in energy. I leaned against the wall, observing silently. Each person in the room was now a variable, each reaction a piece of the puzzle. The birthday celebration, meant to cement my parents' triumph, had become a stage where subtle provocations were rewriting the script. And as the evening stretched on, I felt the quiet satisfaction of control growing. They celebrated loudly, unaware that with every laugh, every toast, every carefully orchestrated arrangement of furniture and photos, the ground beneath them had shifted imperceptibly. A small comment, a slight hesitation, a barely there frown, all signs that the first public tension had blossomed into a more intricate, controlled psychological escalation. And as I moved through the house, polite, calm, almost invisible in my movements, I knew that by the time the next confrontation came, they would not only see the truth, they would feel the full weight of their underestimation. Every subtle provocation, every careful hint, had planted seeds. Every silent pause, every observed reaction, had prepared the room for the moment when the invisible hand of consequence would finally reveal itself. The night grew long, and the celebrations waned, but the tension remained thick, coiled, waiting. I let it settle into the corners of the rooms, in the spaces between words, in the pauses of laughter. My parents and sister had not yet noticed the storm quietly swirling around them, the anticipation I carried like a hidden instrument ready to play its crescendo. By the time I stepped away, letting them continue their celebration, the quiet victories were already in motion. Small doubts had been planted. Suspicion lingered. And the next moves, when they came, would not be hasty or reckless, they would be inevitable. I stepped back into the house a few days later, under the guise of simply visiting, but every move was deliberate. My parents were busy, talking animatedly with relatives, celebrating as if they had secured a victory they could never have imagined slipping from their grasp. My sister was humming while unpacking more boxes, still blissfully unaware of what was about to unfold. I carried with me a folder, thin but heavy with significance, the proof that would quietly unravel the confidence they so arrogantly flaunted. Each page, each seal, each notarized signature was a thread in the fabric of control I had quietly woven. I laid it down casually on the coffee table, ensuring only a subtle presence, allowing it to catch the corner of my parents' vision. Their eyes flickered toward it, but they didn't fully register the weight, assuming it was just paperwork, unimportant. Funny how things accumulate over the years, I murmured aloud, letting the words float, neutral in tone. You'd be surprised what old files can reveal if you actually pay attention. My father paused mid-conversation. My mother's smile faltered, almost imperceptibly. My sister tilted her head, curious. None of them realized that the documents I had brought weren't just old, they were the foundation of their coming realization. The first mini-wait, what, of the evening. I pulled out a letter, letting it slide from the folder just enough for a faint glimpse. It wasn't directly visible, yet the corner hinted at legal authority, signatures they had never expected. Their confidence wavered subtly, the first tendrils of anxiety curling through their posture. My parents exchanged a glance, a flash of hesitation that made my pulse quicken, not with fear, but with anticipation. I reflected briefly on the years that had led to this moment. Birthdays ignored, minor achievements dismissed, subtle favoritism toward my sister, and dismissals of my voice when I questioned even the smallest decisions. Every slight, every undervaluation had sharpened me, honed my patience, and built the strategic mind that now orchestrated this revelation. The audience, privy to my thoughts, understood that my claim wasn't born of spite, it was born of justice, of reclaiming what had always belonged to me. I leaned closer to the folder, pretending to check the papers, letting the air thicken with tension. My sister's hand brushed against the table, almost accidentally revealing part of a document I had partially hidden. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a subtle wait, what, moment that I allowed to linger. My parents' faces, meanwhile, remained polite masks of confidence, but cracks were forming, subtle shifts in their expressions, the tightening of jaws, the slight narrowing of eyes. I spoke quietly, almost to myself. Funny how authority shifts when you least expect it. My words were light, almost casual, but every syllable weighed on the room like a carefully placed shadow. My parents looked up now, curiosity mingled with discomfort, sensing a tension they could not yet name. A minor flashback surged in my mind, my 16th birthday, when a small argument about responsibilities had been laughed off by my parents, leaving me humiliated and unheard. That day had taught me patience, observation, and the power of timing. Today, those lessons became tools in the quiet construction of my plan. I shifted, allowing the folder to rest closer to my mother. Her eyes flicked downward, curiosity piqued. "What's this?" she asked casually, but her tone carried a tremor she barely masked. I smiled, neutral, waiting for her to notice fully, letting anticipation stretch. The room held its collective breath as my sister leaned in, noticing the official seals, the signatures, the faint embossing on the documents. She froze. My father's fingers twitched, a subtle grip on the edge of the chair. My mother's lips pressed tighter, and the first undeniable sense of anxiety began to ripple through the room. I let it hang. I let them stew in the ambiguity. I didn't need to speak, not yet. Each subtle glance, each quiet observation, each accidental revelation of a document corner or a folded signature added to the tension, each one a miniature cliffhanger. I reflected again, letting the audience understand the moral weight behind my actions. This wasn't cruelty. This was reclamation, justice for years of subtle erasure, for birthdays and holidays overlooked, for contributions dismissed. Each page in the folder, each line in the letters, told a story of foresight and rightful ownership. I allowed a pause, letting my parents and sister study the papers themselves. Their confident gestures began to waver. They asked questions, but each question only confirmed the power I had quietly held all along. Their faces betrayed the slow realization that authority, control, and ownership were slipping through their fingers, unrecognized until this moment. A neighbor, casually stopping by, peered through the doorway. Their curiosity heightened the tension, and I noticed my sister's eyes flick toward them, unsure, as if she was suddenly seeing the room differently. Another wait, what, moment rippled silently, unnoticed by anyone else. I let a small chuckle escape my lips, almost involuntarily, but just enough for them to catch it. It was subtle, quiet, almost innocuous, but it hinted that I had knowledge they could not see. My parents' glances shifted rapidly, their polite composure cracking. My sister's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted a stack of photos, the weight of the hidden truth pressing on her in ways she didn't fully understand. Each revelation, each carefully placed hint, each micro-expression of anxiety built layer upon layer. I observed silently, letting the tension stretch, holding the room in a slow, suspenseful grip. The audience, aware of my ownership and the hidden legal power, felt anticipation rising, waiting for the moment when I would finally make the claim undeniable. I allowed another subtle hint, an offhand comment about checking boundaries, about verifying documents before renovation, as if casually suggesting diligence. My parents stiffened, exchanged glances again. My sister paused mid-sentence. Tiny cracks widened, uncertainty crept in, and the psychological edge I had cultivated began to take hold. I reflected briefly, letting the audience understand my calm certainty. I wasn't in a hurry. Every second, every hesitation, every minor reaction in the room worked to my advantage. Each carefully orchestrated micro-moment prepared the stage for the ultimate revelation, ensuring that when the truth finally hit, it would be both undeniable and devastating. The minutes stretched on. Laughter continued, polite conversation floated through the air, but beneath it, tension coiled tightly. Subtle glances, slight hesitations, quiet observations, and almost imperceptible shifts in body language marked the slow dismantling of confidence. Each mini-wait, stacked upon the previous, creating a crescendo of unease. And as I moved among the family, casually sipping water, smiling politely at conversations, nodding at trivial remarks, I knew the tide had begun to turn. The first wave had been public tension. The second had been private calculation. Now, the third, subtle provocations, had quietly unsettled them, planting the seeds of doubt that would bloom fully in the coming moments. By the time I stepped back, letting them continue unpacking, arranging, and celebrating, the psychological edge was mine. They hadn't yet realized it, but the foundation of their perceived victory was quietly slipping. And in that calm, deliberate awareness, I felt the quiet, thrilling certainty of control, knowing the next escalation would bring the revelation that no one in the room could ignore. I returned to the house with calm precision, carrying nothing more than the folder that held decades of quiet preparation. The room was alive with the familiar hum of celebration, voices laughing, clinking glasses, casual chatter, but beneath it, a subtle unease had begun to settle, the tiny seeds I had planted ripening into suspicion. I let my eyes drift over the space, noting every detail, the furniture slightly misaligned, the photos I had subtly commented on now attracting quiet attention, the corners of the room where shadows of doubt had begun to gather. My parents were in the center, speaking loudly, smiling, trying to maintain their confident air, but each glance they cast toward me betrayed a flicker of anxiety they didn't understand. "Funny," I said, my voice quiet but firm, carrying just enough weight to cut through the laughter. "I was looking over some old files, and it seems there's more to this property than we all thought." My father froze mid-sentence, glass in hand. My mother's smile faltered, lips pressing tighter together. My sister, unaware, tilted her head, curious. They thought this was idle commentary, a casual remark, but the subtle tone, the calm confidence in my eyes, carried something heavier, something that hinted at truth they hadn't accounted for. I pulled the folder forward slowly, letting the edges catch the light, just enough for the faint embossing to become noticeable. "It appears," I continued, letting the pause stretch, "that the land this house stands on has been under my name for years." Silence fell, thick and immediate. Conversations faltered mid-word, laughter died in throats, glasses were held a little too tightly. My parents' faces, previously confident, were now taut with disbelief. My father opened his mouth, shut it, opened again, fumbling with words that had never been tested against reality. "What do you mean?" my mother asked, voice rising slightly, a tremor betraying her attempt at composure. I let a faint smile cross my lips, calm, deliberate. "I mean that the foundation, the land, everything you thought you could give, to hand over as you pleased, it belongs to me. Legally, undeniably, and irrevocably." The air shifted. My sister's hand froze mid-motion, holding a vase she had been placing on a shelf. Her eyes widened. My father's knuckles whitened around the edge of a chair. My mother's lips parted, searching for words. The room, filled with people, suddenly felt too small, too charged, as if every heartbeat counted twice. I allowed the pause to linger, letting each person absorb the weight of the revelation. Every careful, confident movement I had made over the past days, the subtle provocations, the hints, the carefully dropped observations, culminated in this moment. The balance of power had shifted, and they were only beginning to feel it. "Wait, what?" murmured a cousin near the doorway, echoing what every other person in the room was thinking silently. My parents looked around, realization dawning slowly, painfully. "You're saying, all this time, the house," my father stammered, voice low, trembling slightly. His confident posture faltered. For years, he had wielded authority as if it were unassailable, but now, that foundation was crumbling beneath him. I nodded calmly. "Yes. All this time, decisions were made as though I didn't exist. As though my rights, my ownership, my investment, my history, didn't matter. But it does. And it always did." My mother's hands pressed to her face, a gesture of shock and disbelief. My sister took a step back, her laughter gone, replaced with quiet apprehension. The quiet room vibrated with unspoken tension, every eye drawn to me, every movement weighted with newfound significance. I allowed myself to glance at the stack of documents, letting the folds of legal proof become visible to all who dared look. "You see," I said softly, each word deliberate, "the land beneath this house, the foundation of every memory you thought you could control, belongs to me. And now, the house itself cannot move without my consent." The crowd shifted, whispers rising like a tide. My parents' smiles had vanished, replaced with the stark reality of vulnerability. My father's jaw tightened, his hands fidgeting with nothing. My mother's eyes darted between me and the folder, searching for a way to reclaim authority that no longer existed. My sister's voice, small, almost afraid, finally broke the silence. You own it?" "Yes," I said, calm, unyielding. "And now you understand why everything I said before, every observation, every hint of concern, it wasn't just noise. It was preparation. It was clarity. It was justice." The room held its collective breath. Every subtle micro-expression, every tremor of hesitation, every tiny flicker of doubt I had observed over the past days now bloomed fully. My parents, once the unquestioned authorities in this home, were suddenly vulnerable, their confidence dismantled piece by piece in front of everyone they had assumed supported them. I let my gaze sweep over the gathered family, each individual silently recalculating, processing, reconsidering their assumptions. For years, I continued, voice calm, carrying the weight of inevitability. Decisions were made on assumptions, on appearances. But reality has a way of surfacing eventually, and tonight, it's here. Another cousin muttered under their breath, clearly trying to process the revelation, while a neighbor peered from the doorway, eyes wide, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Minnie, wait, what?" Moments rippled outward, subtle yet undeniable. Each reaction confirmed the shift of power, each hesitation a silent acknowledgement of truth. I let a calm, deliberate pause settle over the room, letting the tension stretch to its fullest. My parents opened their mouths again, trying to speak, trying to reclaim authority, but every word faltered under the undeniable weight of reality. The psychological edge I had cultivated over days, weeks, years, now held them in quiet submission, not with anger, not with shouting, but with the undeniable truth of ownership. I stepped forward, calm, deliberate, letting the folder rest visibly on the table. "I wanted you to see this for yourselves," I said softly. "To understand the full weight of assumptions, and the consequences of underestimating those you think powerless. And now, the choice is yours, how to move forward knowing the foundation you believed in has always belonged to me." The room, once alive with celebration, now vibrated with tension, anticipation, and quiet awe. Every subtle glance, every nervous gesture, every half-formed question in their minds confirmed that the balance had shifted entirely. The dominant figures in the family were suddenly vulnerable, exposed, aware that the power they had assumed was theirs to wield had quietly slipped into my hands. I allowed the moment to linger, letting the audience feel the culmination of all prior escalations, the public tension, the private calculation, the subtle provocations, all leading to this peak of confrontation. The emotional stakes, once abstract, were now tangible, and the power dynamics had irreversibly changed. And in that silence, I realized that victory was not in anger or chaos. It was in precision, patience, and the quiet, undeniable revelation that the underestimated were often the ones holding the keys all along. I let the silence stretch, letting every heartbeat echo in the room, letting the gravity of the revelation settle on my parents like a weight they could no longer ignore. Their eyes, once confident, now darted nervously between me and the documents. My father's fingers twitched, grasping at the edge of a chair as if it could anchor him to authority that had quietly slipped away. My mother pressed her lips together, nodding slightly as if trying to convince herself that control was still hers, but it wasn't. My sister, who had carried herself with ease moments ago, now shifted, the air thick with unspoken tension. Her smile faltered, eyes widening as understanding dawned. You really owned it?" she asked softly, almost afraid to speak. "Yes," I said, calm, deliberate, letting the word carry all the weight of years of careful observation, patience, and strategic foresight. "The land. The foundation. The house. Everything you thought you could give, control, or claim, it's been mine all along." A hush fell over the room, thick, suffocating, yet exhilarating. Every relative, every friend, every neighbor now felt the tension coiling tightly in the air. Whispers rippled outward, faces turned, eyes widened. The subtle micro-reactions that had been building over the past weeks now bloomed fully. A cousin muttered under their breath, uncertain whether to celebrate, sympathize, or simply absorb the scene. My parents looked at each other, their hands unclenching slowly, realizing that all the power they thought they wielded had quietly shifted. Authority that had once been unquestioned now trembled under the undeniable proof of ownership, and in that trembling, the realization of their underestimation struck hardest. I allowed a faint smile to cross my face, soft but deliberate. Not cruel, not mocking. Just calm, confident, and unshakable. Every word, every subtle provocation from the past days had led to this crescendo. My intelligence and patience had orchestrated the perfect balance, vindication without anger, authority reclaimed without malice. "I didn't want to humiliate anyone," I said, voice steady, measured. "I simply wanted the truth to be known. And now, it is. The foundation, the land, the property, it's mine. And I hope this clarifies things moving forward." The room shifted subtly. My sister's hand hovered over a vase she had been arranging, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and newfound respect. My parents' posture softened, shoulders lowering, as they absorbed the undeniable reality. The calculated calm in my demeanor contrasted sharply with the tension that rippled through the space. A neighbor, peeking through the doorway, whispered to another, almost incredulously, "Did she just?" Their murmur echoed the audience's anticipation, the mini wait, what, moments now resolved, the tension exploding into clarity. I reflected briefly, letting the audience sense the emotional weight of the moment. Years of small injustices, overlooked birthdays, dismissals, favoritism, all of it had been accounted for, studied, and quietly countered. And now, the payoff was complete. My parents, previously dominant and confident, had been humbled not with anger, not with chaos, but with quiet precision. I moved slowly among the family, nodding, acknowledging glances. Each step reinforced my authority, but without cruelty. The room, once buzzing with celebration, now hummed with a new respect, my foresight, my intelligence, my patience all visible in the calm, deliberate control I exercised. My sister, once blissfully unaware, approached cautiously. I didn't know, she admitted, voice trembling slightly. I didn't realize. You didn't need to, I replied gently. Now you understand. And I hope this teaches all of us that assumptions, confidence, and perceived authority can be fragile when met with patience, preparation, and clarity. My parents nodded slowly, the pride they had felt moments ago replaced with acknowledgement, respect, and a quiet lesson learned. The collapse of their authority was complete, but it carried no malice. It was subtle, intelligent, and satisfying, the kind of resolution that lingered, resonated, and settled the tension fully. A cousin whispered to another, eyes wide, "Wow, she really thought this through." Yes, another murmured. Every little hint, every comment, it all makes sense now. The satisfaction radiated quietly through the room. My parents, humbled, began to adjust, their voices softening, their posture easing. My sister's gaze met mine, a flicker of respect forming where ignorance and confidence had once stood. The tension, meticulously built over days and weeks, resolved with elegance, clarity, and undeniable truth. I allowed a brief moment of pause, letting the emotional weight settle fully. Every subtle provocation, every calculated observation, every patient move had led here. The public tension, the private reflection, the subtle provocations, all cascaded into this perfectly timed revelation. And as the room exhaled, each person now aware of the quiet but undeniable shift in power, I realized the victory was complete, not in dominance, not in anger, not in humiliation, but in foresight, intelligence, and precision. The consequences were clear, respect quietly earned, assumptions corrected, authority redefined. My parents, once unshakable, now stood with humility. My sister, once oblivious, now saw the depth of patience, observation, and quiet strategy. And the audience, aware of every step, every micro-reaction, every calculated move, felt the full emotional satisfaction of the payoff. I smiled, soft and deliberate, letting the room adjust to the truth. The storm had passed, and the balance of power had been quietly, irrevocably reset. Every subtle smile, every glance, every shift in posture confirmed that the meticulous, patient, and intelligent strategy had triumphed fully. The room, once charged with celebration, now hummed with understanding. The authority that had seemed so dominant had been quietly dismantled. The vindication, clever, restrained, and deliberate, left no doubt, justice, foresight, and intelligence had won. And in that quiet, lingering moment, the emotional satisfaction radiated not just in my mind, but across the room, settling tension, restoring balance, and leaving everyone, including myself, aware that the underestimated can hold the most power, and use it flawlessly. I sat quietly in the living room, the folder still resting where I had placed it, the house now calm after the storm I had orchestrated. The laughter that had once filled the air had faded into thoughtful murmurs. My parents were still there, eyes lowered, voices softer, their authority no longer a shield but a fragile memory. My sister moved beside me, no longer sure of her footing, her earlier confidence replaced with respect and a quiet acknowledgement of the truth I had revealed without cruelty. I let myself reflect, breathing slowly, letting each heartbeat mark the lessons learned, the patience exercised, the years of subtle planning that had led to this moment. It wasn't anger that fueled me. It was clarity, foresight, and the quiet satisfaction of justice served with precision. I realized then that true power is often unseen, quiet, and calculated. It isn't measured by loud declarations or forced dominance, but by the understanding of timing, the mastery of patience, and the ability to act without malice. The past resurfaced in fragments, birthdays ignored, contributions dismissed, moments when my voice had been silenced or underestimated. Each memory had once stung, leaving scars that I carried silently. Yet now, those same moments became the foundation of wisdom. They had trained me, honed my observation, and cultivated the ability to act when it mattered most. The house, the land, the very walls that had been taken for granted, were more than property, they were a reflection of persistence, intelligence, and the quiet assertion of self-worth. I looked around at the subtle aftermath. My parents, humbled, were beginning to speak softly, tentative but respectful. My sister was organizing the room carefully, mindful of the boundaries she had never considered before. Even the neighbors who had lingered in curiosity now nodded subtly, sensing the shift that had occurred. Every reaction confirmed the truth: patience, cleverness, and careful strategy always find their reward. A smile crept across my face, gentle but assured. The lessons were clear, and the emotional growth undeniable. I had learned that anger is fleeting, but careful observation is enduring. That humiliation can be temporary, but foresight and strategic action last a lifetime. That self-respect, once cultivated, can never truly be taken, even when the world tries. I reflected on the moments that had shaped me, the early dismissals, the subtle favoritism, the quiet doubts cast upon my abilities. They had been trials, yes, but they had also been teachers. Every slight, every misjudgment by those around me, had been an opportunity to learn, to prepare, and to grow. And tonight, those lessons had materialized into action, into proof that clever planning, patience, and a measured hand can triumph where force and arrogance fail. I let the tension dissolve slowly, watching as the room adjusted to the new balance. Respect had been earned, not demanded. Authority had shifted, subtly, irrevocably, without bitterness, without cruelty. And as I breathed in the quiet, I felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that the outcome had been just, not in vengeance, but in rightful acknowledgement. I allowed myself to speak softly, almost as if thinking aloud for anyone listening. Have you ever faced something like this? Moments when people assumed they held all the power, when every glance, every gesture, every decision seemed stacked against you? And yet, with patience, with observation, and with careful planning, there's always a way to reclaim what is yours, to assert what is rightfully yours. The audience, whether here in the room or in imagination, could feel the weight of reflection, the careful consideration of action and consequence. It wasn't simply a story of property or birthdays, it was a story of life, of respect, of intelligence, of timing. I leaned back, letting the quiet wash over me. Every detail of the evening, the laughter, the tension, the tiny micro-reactions, the shifts in body language, now formed a cohesive tapestry of understanding. The stakes had been real, the risk genuine, and the payoff satisfying, not because of triumph over others, but because of the affirmation of my own foresight and integrity. As the room settled into calm, I offered a gentle reminder, a closing thought: if you loved this story, if the twists, the planning, and the revelations resonated with you, then share it. Like, subscribe, and let others experience the tension, the patience, and the quiet victories that life sometimes offers. Every calculated move, every patient step, has its reward, sometimes quietly, sometimes brilliantly. And the moments of clever triumph are worth celebrating, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who believes in foresight, intelligence, and dignity. I rose slowly, the folder now resting safely on the table, untouched, symbolizing more than legal proof. It was the culmination of years of quiet growth, of lessons learned, and of intelligence applied without malice. The room, once alive with celebration, now pulsed with understanding. Respect had been earned. Authority had been subtly dismantled. Tension had been transformed into acknowledgement. And in that quiet aftermath, I smiled, not in arrogance, not in triumph over others, but in deep satisfaction. The underestimated had prevailed. The patient had seen their moment. The careful, clever, and observant had triumphed. And in that realization, I understood fully that life rewards those who act with clarity, patience, and integrity, even when the world believes they are powerless. The story ended not with chaos, not with bitterness, but with reflection, understanding, and quiet satisfaction. Every glance exchanged, every small nod of respect, every soft acknowledgement of the outcome confirmed the power of subtle strategy, foresight, and patience. And as I looked around the room one last time, the weight of the lesson settled fully. Intelligence, calm, and careful planning can reshape authority, reclaim respect, and redefine outcomes, leaving everyone, including myself, aware of the quiet, undeniable truth.